Minor disclaimer about this set of videos. This was recorded on the PTR, and it's entirely possible that mechanics look or even behave differently when it's released on live servers. Rik Reverb is a mostly single target boss with a frequent cleave. The main mechanic of this fight is amplification. Rik will target a random range player to drop an amplifier on before he begins casting amplification, which will also drop an amplifier where he's currently located. If you stand in it, the cast will deal a large amount of damage as well as knock you back and stun you for 3 seconds. Once active, amplifiers do a couple things. First, they'll periodically shoot out resonant echoes that will apply a stacking dot if you're hit by one. Secondly, and most important, the amplifiers will slowly gain energy over time, as indicated by the boss frames. If an amplifier ever reaches full energy, they'll trigger Haywire, which will probably result in a raid wipe. To prevent this from occurring, you'll need to have 2 people assigned to each amplifier that spawns. They'll need to drain the amplifier's energy by standing near it and then right-clicking it. This will spawn a blue circle around the amplifier and apply a 45-second stacking debuff, which will begin dealing increasing amounts of damage to you. It's important to note that you can move while channeling this. Once your amplifier is sufficiently drained, you can break the link by walking out of the circle. Second most important mechanic in this phase is Spark Blast Ignition. Rik will toss out several barrels of fireworks near the current locations of players. Once active, these barrels will begin shooting out swirlies you need to dodge, as well as beginning a long cast called Grand Finale. If you don't kill the barrels in time when the cast completes, each remaining barrel will apply a nasty raid-wide dot for 15 seconds. So it's pretty clear you need to focus these down, but if the raid dying wasn't enough incentive, you also gain excitement from hitting the barrels, which is a stacking 10% movement speed and 2% haste buff. This buff stacks up to 3 times. As mentioned earlier, the spawn location of these barrels is dependent on player positioning, so it's really important to stack up and move together before this mechanic goes out, as a solitary barrel can really screw you over. Rik will target a random player with Sound Cannon, which after a delay will shoot out damage in a line. Aim this away from the raid. Rik will occasionally target several players with Faulty Zap, which creates a blue circle around those players. You just need to spread out so you don't cleave other players with it. For healers, Noise Pollution will deal a small amount of raid damage. This damage increases by 25% for every active amplifier. There are a couple things to keep an eye out for as a tank on this fight. Firstly, the boss's melee attacks are a frontal cone and double as his tank swap mechanic, as they apply a stacking debuff. Second, if a boss is within 15 yards of an amplifier, he will begin juicing it with energy, so you want to make sure to move him after an amplification cast as soon as possible. When Rik reaches 100 energy, he will enter phase 2 by casting Sound Cloud. Sound Cloud reduces Rik's damage taken by 99% for the duration of this phase. He will also remain stationary in the location he was at when he cast Sound Cloud. All in phase 2, you cannot interact with amplifiers. Instead, Rik will choose the amplifier with the most energy and overload it. Shortly after it overloads, it will explode, knocking players up and dealing physical damage. This is important because he will also follow up every amplifier overload with Blaring Drop, a slow, lethal wave similar to Ansarek's Poison Nova. So you want to use the overloaded amplifiers to knock you over the Blaring Drop waves. While this is happening, there's a bunch of resonant echoes you'll need to dodge as well. Rik will then repeat these mechanics, continuing to cycle through the amplifier with the highest energy until his resource reaches 0, and then he will cycle back into phase 1. We did notice that in testing, this resulted in 1 amplifier remaining into the next phase. You can manipulate which one remains based on the energy of the amplifiers going into phase 2. The fight will continue to repeat from phase 1 into phase 2 until he enters phase 2 for the 3rd time. At that point, he will continue casting Blazing Drop endlessly. That about sums up the fight on Heroic. On Mythic, there are a few changes. Amplifiers will be protected by sonic barriers upon initially spawning. This prevents you from interacting with them. You can remove this barrier with another new Mythic addition. Faulty Zap players can stack next to a barrier-protected amplifier and then collide with one another, which will remove the shield permanently. Beware, however, as this collision will trigger Static Jolt, which will deal a large chunk of raid damage as well. Getting hit by resonant echoes, while already affected by the dot that it gives you when hit, will charm you and cause you to walk towards the boss. Players affected by this can be broken out by damaging them. Sound Cannon's damage is now split, and any players hit that are reduced below 75% HP are charmed. This will require you to resolve this mechanic in the opposite way you did in Heroic and group soak this. The TLDR of this fight is as follows. Assign players to soak amplifiers to prevent them from reaching full energy. Group up to spawn barrels close together and focus them down. Make sure the boss is faced away from the raid. Aim Sound Cannon away from the raid. Dodge resonant echoes. And move away from other players with Faulty Zap. In P2, stand in the overloaded amplifiers to get knocked over blaring drop, and dodge resonant echoes. And on Mythic, aim sound cannon towards the raid to split the damage. If you get faulty zap, try to find a partner and group up on a protected amplifier. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.